Welcome to my kitchen. My name's Tamara and I'm doing a video today on how to can tomato juice without a pressure canner. Just the average person that does not can or has never canned tomatoes or any other type of thing, you would not have the things you need to can, like a canner, a food mill, a jar filler, things like that you might not have. But we can learn how to do those with things that you might have in your kitchen already. So we're going to do that with the tomatoes that I just showed you. Actually, there's no tomatoes out here now. They've all been picked and brought in the house. So we're going to go in the house now and we're going to look at those tomatoes and we're going to get started. Okay, we're back in the kitchen and like I told you, here are the tomatoes. This is not even all that I have. I have this many more to do later. They're on my back porch. Okay, let's get started. Right here, we're gonna get started. I have already washed these. You wanna make sure that you wash them, get all of the dirt off. And I do not spray my tomatoes with any pesticides. Some people do that, so you wanna be extra careful about that and make sure that you wash as thoroughly as you can. But mine just had dirt and dried leaves and things like that. So we've got that all clean and we're gonna get ready right now to cut these up and get them on the stove to juice. Okay, you want the biggest pot that you have. Okay, you want a bowl to put your scraps in, and you're gonna have a lot by the end, so you want a big bowl. And you want your pot that you're going to be cooking these in. So let's get started cutting these tomatoes up. Okay, you're going to start off with some good tomatoes without any blemishes, and you're going to cut the core out. This will just help make them juice easier. And then it's simple as just quartering them and putting them into the pot that you're going to cook them in. So I'll do that again. You can cut the top off. Make sure you get that core out, cut them into quarters, and put them in your pot. I'm just about finished with them, and like I said, I'm coring them. You're going to have some that have some green on the top, possibly, or some blemishes. Either don't use that or just cut that out and throw that part away. But if it's questionable, don't use it. So this is my second pot. I'm pretty much done. I have a few more in the basket. But I think I'll leave those for the next time. So I have that first pot of tomatoes that we just cored and quartered, and I'm not adding any water. We're just going to put these on to cook with a lid. Do not add water. There's going to be so much juice in these that you do not need extra water to cook them. So I want you to put them on medium to medium low and let them start cooking. Let that steam come. So you want the lid on to let that steam start coming up, and that steam will start cooking those top ones. And then you want to stir them often just to make sure that they're not scorching. I just want to show you guys, this is just after a few minutes of cooking, and it's made its own juice. The tomatoes aren't done yet, but you do not need to add water. Look at that. It's like magic. So just stir them up from the bottom and rotate them so we can get all those tomatoes nice and soft. It takes about 30 to 45 minutes to cook them down and make them all nice and soft and cooked all the way through. You want them really soft so that you can run them through a food mill or through a strainer. Now we're going to do a strainer today because most people probably does not have a food mill. The tomatoes have been cooking for about 30 minutes and they're almost ready. They're nice, getting nice and soft and juicy. Before you strain these tomatoes, you want them to cool a little bit, because it is dangerous to start straining these when they're so hot, and you could get burned or scalded. So we're going to let them finish cooking, and then we're going to let them cool for about 30 minutes. In the meantime, we're going to go ahead and get our jars ready. I'm going to hand wash these jars. Typically, I would put them in my dishwasher and run them on the sanitize cycle, but I'm going to put these in my sink and wash them by hand in some good hot water. I have a bottle brush and a washcloth, and I'm also going to add about an ounce of bleach. Now this bleach, I've just added it to a jar to have in my kitchen, but I'm going to put a little bit of bleach in my water. I anticipate having about 4 quarts from that first pot of tomatoes. So I'm going to go ahead and do 4 or 5 rings and lids. And I'm going to put them in a saucepan and cover them with water and bring them to a boil. But I'm not going to do that till closer to time to fill my jars. But I'm going to just go ahead and get that ready. You want to separate your lids. You don't want them sticking together in that hot water, because it's hard to get them apart when they're so hot. So we have that ready, and I'm going to cover them with water. We are almost ready to strain these tomatoes. They're all done, nice and soft and all juicy. They're amazing. So what I'm using is a strainer. Most people have these in their house, and a pot, a nice sized pot or a bowl, something tall that you can rest your strainer on, wide enough to rest your strainer on, and pour your juice cupfuls at a time into it. And then you're going to use a wooden spoon and press the pulp from your tomato through the strainer. I recommend that you do this in the sink, because it makes a mess. It splashes and it gets everywhere, and you don't want that all over here. You could do it here if you wanted. So I do it in the sink. I'm going to take a measure cup, dip out some of those tomatoes, and pour it into the strainer. And I'm just going to do a little bit more. This strainer is large enough that it could hold just a little bit more. If you'll hook your measure cup on the edge of your pan, you won't lose it in those hot tomatoes. I'm going to take my spoon, my wooden spoon, and just press those tomatoes through that strainer. It's going to take just a little bit. And just keep going around, pressing through that mesh, letting it drain. And you want as much of that pulp as possible. That's going to make your juice nice and thick. Using the back of that spoon. I should use a spoon without slots. Yes, that's much better. Pressing the back of that spoon against the mesh strainer and getting out that pulp. Now once you have all the pulp out of that batch of juice, we're just going to take this over to that scrap bowl and dump it in. Actually, I'm going to bring the scrap bowl over here so I don't drip. And we still have all this nice pulp we're going to scrape off into the other pan. Then we're just going to do that again. I know this seems like a lot of steps, but trust me, it's worth it in the end. You have your tomato juice that you canned. You'd be so proud of yourself. You don't want to overfill your strainer. It will slosh over the top, and I think I did that a couple times. I really hope that this helps somebody. If you try to can your own juice that you've grown from tomatoes from your own backyard, I'd love to know. I've run the last bit of juice through the strainer, and like I said, you don't want to lose the pulp on the outside of that strainer, so you want to scrape all that off into the pan. And when you've got that done, you're ready to start filling your jars. You've already sterilized your jars, they're ready. And at this point, I'm going to turn on my lids to get them up to a boil. You really just want to heat those lids up. You want to activate the rubber seal around the lids so that they will conform to your jar. All right, now here is what I typically use to fill my jar. I usually use a jar filler. It has a wider opening. If you don't have one of these, you could get, I have a funnel. You could use just a measure cup and gently pour it into your jar. I don't feel like you have as good control with a ladle that you would if you had something like this measure cup. So I'm going to try the measure cup and see how that works. So my juice is pretty cool now, and I'm just going to give it a stir with that wooden spoon. Make sure all that pulp is mixed well into the liquid. And then I'm just going to scoop it out and pour into the jar. Carefully. You're going to have to take a clean towel and wipe the rim of your jar and any spillage that you get on the outside. And keep in mind, you could use pint jars. I just happen to use quarts. Actually, you could use that large measure cup. It would probably go much faster if you had something larger. We'll finish this step and then we'll come back to get them onto the water bath. I got 3 quarts out of that pot of tomatoes. I am going to add to the quarts 1 teaspoon of sugar to each jar and a ½ teaspoon of salt. I'm going to take a clean towel and clean the jars around the rims and any spillage, clean up any spillage. I think I did pretty good about not spilling too much on the jar. Now I'm going to bring my hot lids over. Once you get your lids and your rings on, you want to just tighten it down. No, don't over tighten so that you won't have trouble getting them off when you go to use your tomato juice. All right, we're ready to prepare our canner. Okay, so like I said, we're not going to use a canner this time. I'm using the tallest stock pot that I have. Now I'm going to be placing my jars inside this pot, but first I want to line the bottom of this pot with a towel, and then I'm going to add my water. You want your jars to not be directly on the bottom of this pot or they could break. So we're going to fill this with water, bring it to a boil, and then add our jars to the pot. You want to add enough water that when you put your jars in, it's going to cover the tops of those jars. And you're going, for a quart, you're going to boil it for 45 minutes. That's probably enough. I'm going to turn it off and get it on the stove. It's already starting to simmer, so I went ahead and put my jars in, and we're going to let it boil or simmer for 45 minutes. If you have a pot with a rack in the bottom, that is the preferred way to water bath. This is not the best way, so if you do have a pot with a rack in the bottom, you could do that. You could also lay these rings, you know, the rings of your lids, line the bottom of your pan with that, and I should have done that. I think I would have liked that method better, and then just set your jars on top of those. But we're going to let this cook, and we're going to remove them. You want to be as careful as you can taking these out of the pot of water. If you have a jar lifter, wonderful. If not, dip some of that water out before you take those jars out of that hot water. My jars are boiling, and they have been boiling for about 5 minutes, so now we have 40 minutes to go. So you can see how a pressure canner might be faster, but if you don't have one, then you can try this. At least give this a try, and maybe you'll want to just dive into the canning world. Time's up. It has been 45 minutes. So I'm going to turn my timer off and carefully remove this lid and turn the temperature off. This water is very hot, obviously. So I'm going to dip some of that out so that I can remove my jars. If you don't have a jar lifter, you need to be very careful. Maybe even let it cool before you take them out. This is a jar lifter. You just grab the top of that jar, and then you can bring it over to your towel. We're doing things possibly for someone who does not have canning supplies. I'm just going to use an oven mitt. Let's get an oven mitt, and we can grab that and bring it over to our towel. You just have to make sure that that water is low enough not to burn you. Okay. So that was in the water, for the boiling water, for 45 minutes. So you should be good. We should be sterile. Everything should do just fine. So like I said, this is a beginning way to start canning. If you see that you like to do this, you could go and buy the supplies. You could get a canner. You could get all the things. Or you could go to your local farmer's market. A lot of times those places have canneries where you can go there and prepare your food. You can sterilize your jars. You can do the canning at the cannery at your farmer's market. So check your local city and see if you have that. Thanks for watching, and I hope that this was informative, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Good morning. It's the next day, and I just come in my kitchen. My jars are sealed, but I wanted to show you something. Tomato juice has a tendency to separate. There's so much water content in tomatoes that when you juice them and you can them, and you can see it through a glass jar or clear glass jar, it's going to separate just a little bit. If you have never canned tomatoes or tomato juice, you might not know that. But you're just going to give it a shake before you use it, and it's good as new. Just wanted to show you that so that you did not think that something was wrong with your tomato juice.